as soon as the project started, as soon as that moment we arrived at the studio, everything went wrong.
Hi, I'm Spence. Welcome to the Prosperous Musician, and today I've got a very special guest with me today. It's none other than Pete Hartley. Now, Pete Hartley is somebody who I've known for a few years now, more than a few years, and somebody who has kind of inspired me in lots of ways and guided me when I started busking. Thank you for coming on, Pete. It's great.
Pleasure.
So let's rewind all the way back to the beginning, Pete. And so how did you get started in music? You come from a musical family, or how did it all start for you?
Yeah, you have to stop me if I get the rabbit on too long, because it goes back a long way. My mum was a violinist. She got to quite a high standard as a violinist. Never professional, but because my mum's, she'd be 99 in September. So the war came along, and she volunteered, and she joined the army. And as a woman, then you couldn't fight, but she was working the radar. And my dad was, in the back seat of a Lancaster bomber. He was a tail gunner and stuff. So anyway, so that's how they got together. War's over. They start having kids. A good Holy Catholic family. So I was number 8 child out of 9. And so you can imagine, from my mum's point of view, she's either pregnant or has got a baby between the age of 0 and 1. And many older children that she's got to get off to school. So my dad worked 2 jobs, and my mum did all the house, which is probably, my dad probably got off lightly, really. But so by the time I got to 8, she's actually, you can imagine the older ones are getting older gradually. There's no babies anymore. There's only one younger than me, and so she started playing violin again. And she did start teaching around schools a year or so later. But anyway, hence, she wanted to start my sister playing violin, my 1-2 years older. And she didn't want to start me because she didn't think I was musical. And so, but I was just so jealous of the fact that my sister had a violin. So I got one for my 8th birthday. Then my sister fell over and broke her arm. And then she gave up. So I ended up being the violinist. Yeah, so that was it. So that's how it all started. Completely, just like the rest of my life, sort of somewhat chaotically and for the wrong reasons. But anyway, so I was a violinist.
And what age were you again then?
I was 8. Yeah.
You were 8, and so you heard your mum playing violin, and she could obviously play fairly well, because the violin's not really an instrument you can take to if it's not being played very well. Yeah. And so you obviously took to that, and so she obviously, as a violin, she taught you from then?
She taught me to begin with, and then I went off to grammar school before I got kicked out of it, which was about 2 years later. And there's a great old guy called Cyril Perfect there, who taught violin. Now, Cyril has a very famous daughter. Have you ever heard of Christine Perfect?
I have to say I haven't.
Later Christine McVie.
I've heard of Christy McVie, yeah.
Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah.
That's his daughter. Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, so that was interesting to be taught by what was an old sort of posh guy who, but got this. I suppose the reality of it was, at that time his daughter was probably buried under half a ton of cocaine. To me, doing fantastic worldwide sales. Anyway, so actually, I suppose I don't know for sure that she did, but anyway. So I had lessons there, and I was very lucky that I got lots of older brothers, of course, being number 8, and they listened to really good music like Miles Davis and Muddy Waters and Bob Dylan and the Stones and Beatles and Hendrix and all that stuff. So that was going around in my head, and also I got in with the wrong crowd at just the right time. So instead of going, because until I was about 10 or 11, I was a good Catholic boy playing classical music. Not a good combination, and I rejected all of that, and that got me into wanting to be in the rock world, really. And so my dream gradually became I wanted to be a rock star. I'm not quite sure how to go about it as a fiddle player, really. But anyway, that's the background to it all. A bit confused, and so anyway, so. To cut a long story short, I suppose I might as well jump to when I was about 19, and then I I made that journey of hitchhiking off to London to sort of make the big time, and with a bit of paper in my pocket with a couple of addresses on it that I might be able to stay at if I asked the people very nicely. And that's the start of my journey into music. So, and again, I was busking by this time as well. I started busking about a year before in Birmingham, just with an acoustic violin. Usually went out with started out going out with a guitarist, a guitar fiddle duo. Interesting that, again, very naively, I didn't know any tunes, and so we used to listen to a lot of the jazz funk stuff of the day, like the Average White Band and all this sort of more jazz as Grover Washington and I suppose the Herbie Hancocks and all those at that time. And so your mate would strum one chord for about half an hour in a sort of funky rhythm, because in those days you only needed one chord for that. And I'd improvise with no particularly, I didn't have very good chops at the time, but I didn't realise that. Again, naivety is a great virtue when you're young as well. You don't realise how bad you are, so you keep on going on, But so anyway, I discovered that you could busk. We discovered you could earn a living from it. I headed off to London, and I sort of ended up, first of all, sleeping on the floor of my mate who was at Goldsmiths College. He was in a junk shop. Above a junk shop, there's all these rooms with art students in them, And anyway, we all got kicked out of there after a bit, and so I ended up squatting in a warehouse full of artists and various other places, and eventually in a housing cooperative in South London. I got to London, so now I really wanted to study. I wanted to become a good violinist, so I found a teacher there, and I started to practice. I thought, this is it. Music's for me. This is it. I've got to become this great violinist, and so I started practicing 5 hours a day of just studies, scales, and just exercises, really, a little bit of bark as well. And I'd go and busk outside the sort of festival hall in London and stuff, which I thought was really quite ironic when I was playing the Bach A minor concerto outside, and Yehudi Menuhin was playing the same tune inside, so that sort of tickled me in a strange sort of ironic sort of a way.
And what kind of era are you talking here? Is this 80s or?
This was in the 70s. Arrived in London at the very end of 78. So 17. This period now was 79, and also my intention when I got to London was to sort of live off busking. And that was
what was busking like then, in terms of were there many people doing it, and what kind of thing what was your setup, what was your act, if you like, how did you?
Strange. Looking back, it's so funny. I still didn't know any tunes, and so I just improvise, make up stuff as I went on, which as a solo violinist is a bit of a weird thing to do, really, because from the punter's point of view, there's nothing for them to grab onto, But that's what I was doing. And what was it like? I arrived in London, I'd hitchhiked there, I got the flu, and it was below freezing. It was horrible. And I got these couple of addresses. So I set up in Leicester Square, promptly got arrested. I got £10 in my pocket and got fined £10. That's the start of it all, Wow. So, that's... I guess I had a lot of self-belief, because at the point it's show me a sign, But so that was at that time. Impression it seemed as an outsider was that tubes were completely sewn up, At that time, there's like they used to call the Green Park Mafia and all that. So I used to go to South Kensington a lot, besides, as I say, by the festival hall.
Sorry, what was, just going back to what you said, the Green Park Mafia, so what was that about?
Well, that was in those days, and I eventually, a couple of years later, I did end up playing under tubes and became part of that, what might be called the Green Park Mafia. Basically, there's a whole bunch of buskers who basically, in a chaotic way, had their own system, so that whoever got there first, there's two main pitches at Green Park, and that's really the best station. There's the upstairs one and the downstairs one, but they're both below ground. You see, one was higher and one at the other. And a list would start. Whoever got there first would start the list, And the first person there would play from 7:30 in the morning till 10:30 in the morning. Thereafter, the next person would have 10:30 till 11:30. So what you'd do is you'd book yourself into both of the pitches. So perhaps you'd get, if you're the first person, you'd do the 7:30 till 10:30, then you'd have the 10:30 to 11:30 on the other one. Or if you couldn't get either of those, you'd start off, you work, that's how, and that, what would happen would be that if somebody new came along, they'd trip them up. They'd sort of tell them, no, there's no pictures available until tomorrow at 12. And of course, it never ever went until the next day. So it was just a way of keeping the new people out, and keeping it for the people who are already doing it. And it's an interesting philosophy, really. But were you ever a member of Equity, the Actors Union? No. Very different to the Musicians Union. Equity used to have a system whereby to become an Equity member and get your Equity card, which allowed you to do all the work as an actor, you had to have worked as an actor. And so obviously you couldn't work as an actor without an Equity card. But the point was, this meant that anybody who got an Equity card was pretty determined. And then there was a strange way with this system with Green Park. It meant that somebody who wasn't determined to be a busker, who in the end, who everybody saw, despite the fact they're tripping each other up and that, they are sort of relying on each other, like a bunch of rogues, somehow, what's the word? Honor among thieves, I suppose, Anyway, so that's the sort of scene. So, and the other thing that happened, is I was saying about getting arrested and fined, first of all. I then, for the first few months, I did live off busking, but then I got arrested. I'd actually popped up to Yorkshire just for a couple of days and got arrested on my 20th birthday for busking in Leeds. And I thought, well, fuck them. If they're going to fine me for this, I'm just going to sign on the dole, So I signed on the dole, and then carried on practicing all full time. And it just allowed me. It's a bit like other people would go to university and have a grant. I cost a lot less and worked just as hard, Also, I joined a band, and that was one of the focuses of going to London as well, was that I joined this band, and they're a jazz fusion band, very complicated music. There's nothing in 4/4 in the whole thing. It was all sort of like bars of 15 and sort of 11 and this, that, Got good training, but we couldn't get any drummers and bassists, and it gradually, the end of I've just got to get working. And I saw a gig going in the Melody Maker for a theatre thing in a place called the Albany Empire in Deptford, and it was a fringe play called The Angels Descended on Paris. I could run over there and find the old stuff from it, but and you can imagine, but it was a 6 weeks or so run, and I got the gig, and so that's the start of my professional career. And now I signed off the dole in I suppose it was the start of February 1980, saying I'd never sign on again, and here I am. I never have. 40 years later, although I'm getting the money from the Chancellor now for my 80% for the COVID money. But so that's how it all started. And again, for a while things went really well. I did this gig. I then did some gigs around town. We'd done a competition, the band I was in, because I used to have this is the good old days, a jazz rock competition by the Greater London Arts Association. Imagine that you got to put money into a competition for people playing jazz rock music, and the prize was to do a few gigs at Ronnie Scott's and stuff. We didn't win, but the people who, among the judges, was Barbara Thompson and John Heisman, who, of John Heisman of Colosseum and Tempest, working with Gary Moore and Alan Holdsworth and all those guys, doing supports for Hendrix before that, and serious and worked with Jack Bruce a lot as well, you know. So serious musicians, they heard me play, and so they sort of poached me for their band, which again takes me up to there. So suddenly I joined this fantastic band, which I mentioned before. You know, go straight from playing the Amersham Arms in Deptford, or was Deptford, the Amersham Arms, playing Irish music. You know, there was you know, suddenly walking out in front of 5,000 people. You know, and going on after me, as I say, there's people like. You know, you'd have Billy Cobham or Chet Baker, or in the one gig we had Ella Fitzgerald, McCoy Tyner. You know, these people are like, I'm on the same, you know, the same bill. You know, it's absolutely, utterly terrifying. I mean, I was completely and utterly out of my depth and just blagging it completely. So I did that gig for a year, and then, you know, sometimes in life, the pack of cards falls down in a big heap. And I had one of those moments. I've had several of those, but I had one then. I saw, you know, it all went wrong with the band really after a bit. I mean, mainly through me being too green and too naive and not really knowing how to ask for help at that time. You know, which again, if you looking back, if you could change things, you know, I'd have done all sorts of things different to actually gain the knowledge that I needed, rather than just try and bluff to cover it quickly. You know. Like play lots of fast notes to sort of pretend you know what you're doing, because no one can hear. You know, if you play a lot of fast notes, some of them are going to be right. You know, and so that ended. Split up with my girlfriend. Something else, and suddenly it's the start of 1982. I've got to find somewhere new to live. I've got no gigs, no income, no nothing. What am I going to do? And as I say, I said I wouldn't sign on the Doles. So at that point, I thought, right, I'm going to go and busk down the tubes. And so that started a period of 18 months where I did sort of 5 days a week down the tubes as part of what was viewed from outside as the Green Park Mafia, you know.
So you just got into that by just turning up and persisting, and they eventually
persisting, yeah. I mean, it wasn't that there was any official way of being let in. It's just after a bit you become part of the fabric, really. Yeah. And that was an interesting.
What kind of? So you were doing that full time now. So you
The gigs had sort of run. I had a few gigs then. I mean, I played with one country and western gig called Rodeo Times, and another one was called Alive and Kicking. Sorry, no, it was Alive and Kicking, yeah. And what was the third one I did? And I did some pretty funny gigs of those. I mean, the first country and western gig I did, but I turned up, you know, like a young jazzer, you know, looking very plain and amp and fiddle. Everyone's dressed up as cowboys, you know, and you know, and then they have a shootout at the interval, and you think. This is weird, you know. But they all took it very seriously. But as I say, so suddenly I'm doing that. An interesting thing that happened then is that we used to be signs down the tubes at that time that says, you know, buskers £50 fine, you know, and all that. And we used to play in front of the sign.
And that's and then like at 1982, £50. What's that equivalent to now?
Well, I suppose I was earning about. I think I remember earning about 150 quid a week then, so perhaps about £30 a day. So it's a good day and a half's income. You know, I mean, it's not. So I suppose probably we're talking about 200 quid now. It might be more. I mean, and again, it might have been only slightly less than that then. Again, the time sort of twists those numbers really. But I mean, one of the interesting things is we used to get fined regularly. So, but most of the times the situation was, if we saw a copper coming down the long tube, because of course you're playing down the long tube, you can see a couple of miles up. What you did, there's a sort of like an arrangement with everybody, an unwritten rule. Copper comes on, you stop playing, and you don't play anything until they've walked past and gone out of sight. Then you start playing again. And they were, generally speaking, all fine with that, you know. I mean, if they were in a bad mood at being told by their senior they had to go and nick some buskers, then, you know, they would. But that was generally the way. But I did have a funny one, which was there was a Welsh copper called taff. And of course, these are the underground coppers that, apparently the overground coppers, I used to refer them as the Toy Town cops, but anyway. And this particular one, Taff, he was very serious about his job, and he would like to nick Busker. So what you'd do is he'd come along and sort of tell you to move. So you'd go around the corner, wait till he's gone and start up again, generally. And so he came back, and so he nicked me for that the one time. So the next day, he'd come by and he says, you've got to move. So I moved. So I walked out of the station beyond the barriers, so still in the station itself. He actually told me to leave the station, what he said. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd left the station. I was on the other side of the ticket barriers. So he stood on the one side and I stood on the other. So after a bit, well, I better go somewhere. I'm going to earn no money today. So I got another ticket, put it through. As I went through, he promptly arrested me. So I took up to the station and got charged with loitering. Now, loitering isn't normally a thing you charge buskers with. So the next day we're in court, and I was going to plead not guilty. But then I thought, let's just plead guilty. And I just want to get it over, get back out earning some money. Don't want to waste time. And of course that was with the other. Normally get charged under the bylaws of of London Underground. So anyway, so I'm in court, and so he says it's for loitering. And funny enough, all the other people in court were in for loitering within the toilets at Green Park Station. Yeah. And so it's quite funny. So I felt quite embarrassed when everybody else has been, the actual phrase was, you can cut it out if you don't want to, but he was seen to be openly masturbating and encouraged other than to join in a cubicle. So there's me, violinist, coming through the ticket barrier. So the magistrate says to me, so well, okay, tell me what happened. I said, well, I'd been told to leave the station. I left the station. Now I've got my ticket, and so I was going to go and find another place to play, because I couldn't wait. They said, oh well, in our opinion, that's not loitering, So because it's a magistrate's court, we said we're going to have to send it up to the other court because we're going to have to. We don't accept your plea of guilty. So that the more senior copper says to the TAF, so you're not going to win this, And so he had to come in and do what's called saying, I offer no evidence. So it's dismissed. And then he was told he had to give the ticket back to me that he'd taken off me. So as he came over to me, he said on his breath, says, you haven't heard the last of this, Hartley. So it's all a bit like that. And the next day, his mate was gone around nicking all the buskers because they're trying to wreak revenge. So it was a bit like that. But I'll tell you that the interesting thing that comes up from this, as I say, it was just a normal thing. We'd get nicked fairly regularly. They'd just take your name and address. You get the summons through the post. You'd post it off. You'd get a fine through the post. You'd pay it. You carried on. You worked your 5 days a week, and the fines were normally £5 or £10. Come about May of 1983, I got offered a gig out in Ibiza. I'd been holding out to be a really famous musician, and I really felt London was where I had to be. I'd auditioned for a couple of bands, one of which was Dexys, if you remember Dexys Midnight Runners. That was really weird. I could go back to Birmingham to do an audition. And again, it's a classic, it's a wonderful tale of how not to do an audition. Because there's me, I've worked at this great band and played on these stages with all the world-class players. So I had a sort of rather inflated ego. So when my attitude was, there's some pop band that needs a fiddle player. And I remember saying to Kevin Rowland, so do I get to play any solos? Which not what you say to somebody who's leading a pop band, particularly like Dexys, when they're going to do Come On Eileen and all that stuff. So anyway, I didn't get the gig. But so I got pretty depressed waiting for this call that was going to come and that never came. So when I got offered a gig in Ibiza, I thought, oh, what the hell, let's take it. I'm getting nowhere here. So went out and sort of did 2 gigs a night in Ibiza. I was playing Joe Spoon's Irish pub with one guitarist till about midnight, and then have a little sort of spliff break and you know, it's a serious young drinking time, drinks free. So I drink vodka through the evening up until this point, have a brandy, and then I can see Kevin, who's going to do the second set with, and the other in Sergeant Pepper's Club, and you know, stagger onto stage and sort of play for another 45 minutes till about 1 a.m, then drink till about 4 a.m and stuff. And it's quite a wild life, really, for a young musician, you know. So what you remember of it and stuff. But what happened then was the interesting bit. Was I'd gone out there, and because it's the olden days, there's no internet, there's no phones, are pretty limited. You know, you could queue up and put your money in, and post took forever. So literally, I was getting stuff that'd been sent to my previous flat was now arriving 6 weeks later with me. So, out of the blue, this sort of a very official looking letter arrived from the courts telling me that I'd been fined 2 lots of £50 with 2 lots of £10 cost, so 120 quid. As I said, that's actually a lot of money then, particularly when now I'm actually in Ibiza and it's actually pesetas I'm earning. It's not, you know, a lot of money. But not only that, but because it's taken 6 weeks to arrive, it was to be paid, I think, within a couple of weeks or whatever it was. There's now a warrant out for my arrest when I arrived back for non-payment of fines. So that put me in a very interesting predicament, because I didn't have the money to pay this fine now, and when I arrived back, I was going to be arrested for not having the, you know, for not paying it. That's rather an awkward position to be in when you're abroad back then, and back in those days, sort of thing. So that was quite an interesting one to solve. I did a couple of months doing the Ibiza thing, and you know, it's really wild. It was really mad. You know, the people. I mean, one night somebody let off a canister of tear gas in the gig we were doing, you know, and stuff, and you know, and it's all complete debauchery and fights and extreme drunkenness, and you know, the English wanted to fight the Germans, the Swedish wanted to fight the Germans, I think all they'd fight the English if they couldn't fight the Germans, and you know, and it was all like that. And we were sort of, and for a while it was a lot. It started out being more fun, but gradually as the season went on, it got more, just felt more violent, really. And I'm doing 7 nights a week, 2 gigs, and then the one night I got a headache, and yet one more Irishman fell on me while I was playing in Irish, and in Joe Spoon's Irish. But I thought, bollocks, I've had enough of this. You know, I'm going to go busking around Europe. So I got the boat over to from Ibiza to Perpignan in France, and then got a train from there. They got 25 quid in my pocket now. You know, 15 quid went on this train fare. I was heading to Saint-Tropez is where I wanted to head for, and ended up going to, I think, San Rafael or somewhere, and started my busking journey around Europe. And that was really very different. I liked it. I'd only stay in a place a few days, and I'd try and find it's like a pension to sort of stay in for the night. And a lot of times you could get a place for, I don't know, for a few quid then. Right, obviously it depends what it was. It's Swiss money or what have you. I could earn enough to sort of to support myself, basically. And as soon as I had enough of a place, I could head off somewhere else. One of the best points of it was because Switzerland is a funny old place. It's so expensive to live in, but the money was worth so much. Whereas, of course, it borders with Italy, where the money is worth so little, but it's so nice to be, you know. And so I ended up, for a little while, I stayed near Lake Como in Italy, which of course is fantastic, beautiful. And I'd get the train into Lugano in the day, do my busking, get me Swiss francs, change them into lira, and now they're worth a fortune. Go and sort of drink Italian wine, eat Italian food, go to sleep, get up, go back and do it again, you know. And that seemed clever. But anyway, so I did all that, and that was an interesting experience. And I sort of thought after that, I would probably, that would be my life from then on. Every summer I would go and spend a life on the road.
And what age were you at this point?
Well, this was 1983, so I was 24.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And again, the other interesting thing about that was wherever I went, I kept on meeting buskers I knew. Because there's loads of buskers
from Britain, from the Green Park Mafia.
Yeah, lots of those. Yeah, and you could hear a saxophone in the distance as arrived in, let's say, one of these French resorts, and it's like, that's Carl, and so you go follow the sound, and it was Carl the sax player.
So obviously then it was things like playing the saxophone, playing the violin, pure acoustically. So I'm guessing the way the amplifiers.
Actually, no, it started to change. When I went, this 1992, I go down the tubes, and I've just got a fiddle, and I'm playing the same 4 tunes, because now I've learnt some tunes, because you've got a constant flow of people, ever changing. So no one's sticking around in the tubes. So literally, you could play the same 1 tune forever if you wanted. Most of the guitarists just played the Deer Hunter then, forever and ever and ever and ever. So I had 4 tunes. I think it was a Bach concerto, probably 3 minutes of that, and Meditation on Tire. So I'd just go around and play those, gradually driving myself insane. It was that sort of changing technology. Suddenly, very, very primitive battery amps started to arrive. So little 10-watt things with no reverb on them. That arrived. Also, suddenly one day, I saw this other busker playing fiddle, and he got this orchestra behind him. And it was like, he'd got rigged up a little car stereo and a cassette with the Music -1 with the orchestra on it. So I thought, wow, I must have that. And so I had started using that. I'd got me a little, something like an FBT amplifier, and got a bunch of rechargeable batteries. And then I bought a couple of pedals or 2. I actually got some really good gear from playing in the band I was in before. I got one of those classic Roland Space Echoes that will now go for thousands, because it was this rack thing with real tape in it, and the original Roland chorus and everything. So technology was moving on at that point, and so I had started doing that. Also, Jamie Abersol tapes. These, you can play jazz albums by Jamie Abersol where you get a book, and you can play Miles Davis, you can play Charlie Parker. So I started doing some of those as well down there, and so it was getting a bit more sophisticated. And also I got a piano player, classical piano player, to sort of make some backings for me as well, just piano onto a cassette. And so it was a little bit getting more sophisticated. As I say, so that was an interesting old time. So the plan was I was going to come back and go back to London and carry on, and then go back to Europe again. But somehow I came back via Birmingham, ended up staying in Birmingham, and found that I earned loads more money in Birmingham than ever I did in London. Which is sort of funny.
And why was that? Why was that, do you think?
I think it's because I was a big fish in a little pond. And you've got to remember, I've now turned electric. Obviously I played electric in the bands, but now I'm a proper early electric busker. And in 83, I would have had a little, something like a little PV amp, perhaps a pedal or 2, and a ghetto blaster. Then it turned into having, as 84 started, a mate of mine had built me this little car stereo on wheels, and so I got that, and then so people would stop and stare as I was setting this gear up, because I hadn't seen anybody setting gear up in a street before, and it made a big impact, for no good reason really. And then so the plan was I was going to go back to Europe, but then I got offered the gig doing Blood Brothers, the musical theatre thing, Blood Brothers, Willie Russell. It was the second run. It got its first run in 83, and I did the audition, got the gig. So it's 5 months touring, doing theatres, 8 shows a week, for usually 2 weeks in a venue. Then you move to the next one, and that was a really, again, very useful learning experience of busking, because I'd go out busking in the day as well as doing the theatre show. as much as anything, just to keep myself sane, because as much as it's a fantastic show, Blood Brothers, if you haven't seen it, I really recommend it. Fantastic, but when you're doing the same show 8 times a week, you know, when it's opening night, your nerves are carrying you through it, trying to remember everything. And by the end of the first week, it's not going to get any better now. You've learned it, and it's probably only going to get sort of worse as you sort of gradually, your mind starts to play with it. So I was going out busking, and we did the tour started in Nottingham for 5 weeks, busked there. That was sort of interesting to people. You got this sort of mad pavement artist there, and her even madder husband, who was threatening to sort of destroy my gear because it was in competition with her and stuff. So it was Nottingham to Glasgow, I think it was. So I went straight to Glasgow, and Glasgow was amazing because it was the first time I ever earned 100 quid in a day. You know, this is before selling CDs, or well, before cassettes and CDs. Yeah. And so just to play for 3 hours, and you got 100 quid in big old money, you know. And I got so drunk that day because I went to the big bag of money, and I sort of went, let's go to the pub, you know. So I must have met a bunch of the actors in there as well, and bought them all a drink and had a drink with each one of them. And suddenly it's time to do the show. I'm really pissed, you know. I was so pissed. I thought I'm going to have a hangover during the show. I better actually slip some booze on with me. This is so unprofessional. But I was young, you know. And anyway, I should have been sacked for that. But you know, I mean, I had a bad moment. I mean, because I used to play as well as playing the regular electric violin, I had another one that's an octave lower, sort of halfway between a viola and a cello. And that requires, you see, whereas the normal violin doesn't require my conscious brain to work. I've got it all in here. But with the one an octave down, everything's in a different place. So I actually have to think all the time, which doesn't work when you're really pissed. And I did cock one thing up really badly. Anyway, but that was an interesting.
So you've broken the 3-figure barrier at that time.
Yeah, and that was amazing. And again, to put that, this is 1984. This is a lot of money for just us doing.
What would that be equivalent to then?
I guess that's probably. I bet you it's about 350 quid or something. But when you think it's just cash, no sales, just in a so. You know, and also I'm getting a good salary doing the show. So, I mean, as I say, it's really, I mean, the great thing about this time was that I was doing it purely, really, for my own pleasure. And, you know, and actually I was earning more than some of the main actors, you know, not the very high. I mean, if you're familiar with sort of any of the McGann's actors, like Mark McGann, Joe McGann, they were both in the show. The other two McGanns weren't, because there's a Paul McGann and there's another one who I can't think. Whereas Mark and Joe McGann were playing Sammy and Mickey. We got. Do you follow boxing at all? Do you remember John Conte? Yeah. He was the narrator.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, he lost his license to box at that point, and he'd become an alcoholic. And there's different sorts of alcoholics, and he was one that didn't drink. It dried up, but then on a Friday night he might have a half a lager, and that would mean that you could guarantee that by Saturday matinee show he wouldn't have been to bed. He would have drunk the whole way through to the show, and somebody would have to tell an ex-world champion boxer that he couldn't go on stage. But actually he's a lovely guy, and to his credit, I mean, he got kicked out of the show in the end. It just got too bad. But to his credit, I met him probably 8-9 years ago, and he'd been dry for 25 years or something. You know, he'd actually turned his life around. He genuinely went into the gutter, you know, and actually, you know, he came up again. So that was very, very pleasing to see, because he easily could have not come up, But anyway, so as I say, so that was the show, and it's just really interesting experience to do the different towns then, because I say Glasgow's fantastic. Then went to Newcastle upon Tyne. That wasn't very good, although the digs were really interesting. I stayed with these two gay blokes, one of which was a magistrate, and their hobby was going cottaging, so that was a scream, the theatrical digs can be interesting. And so from Nottingham to Leeds was okay. Leeds, Bath was the next one. Bath I hated, of course Bath's famous for buskers. I didn't like it at all. I much preferred Glasgow, And then we went to Plymouth, and I didn't like Plymouth at all. That was really unresponsive. Then from Plymouth we went to Manchester, which is okay. Then Manchester we went to Liverpool, where we finished the show. I think did 3 weeks at the Empire, I think it was there. And the Liverpool was fantastic then for busking. It was just, so of all those towns, the two places that were by far the best was Liverpool and Glasgow.
And that's strange, isn't it? You'd find that. I'd have thought now, I suppose, like if you're playing violin, I guess it depends what kind of music you're playing with violin, but you'd have instantly thought Bath would be the kind of place that would go down well. But it's often funny, isn't it, with busking, because it's like when you go to places like that, you think if sometimes if it's a higher class of person, inverted commas, then they're less likely to give you money than if you go to somewhere that's like seen as more working class, so you tend to get more response. But
it all depends. But that was the experience then, and it's just very, very interesting at that time. So so we're only up to 84. So
we've got to wait. It might be a two-parter. So you're doing the. It sounds like you're doing well at the moment. You're doing the show. You're still with the gig. You're earning hundreds of pounds busking per day. So at that point, are you still wanting to? Have you still got the plan of being like a famous musician, or are you just going, I'm just happy just to be gigging? And
well, I suppose at the time, I still had this idea of destiny sort of thing. The show ended. I tried going back to London. It didn't work, and I ended up, back in Birmingham, where I'd always said when I left Birmingham I'd never go back there, and again starting to make a bit of a splash. The next big change which had happened was that during Ludborough, as I was earning decent money then, suddenly the first of the Porter studios had come out. So the old, X15, the Fostex one. So I bought this, wow, now I can make my own backing tracks. And I bought myself a Tokai Strat and an Ibanez sort of poor man's precision bass type thing. And a drum machine, this Korg horrible thing, and now I could make backing tracks, yippee. And so I set about making backing tracks, and also started recording original music. And following on to this, I thought, right, I'm getting old now, I'm coming on 26, and I thought I haven't made any of my own albums. I'd recorded an album with a band in 82, which is pretty far out jazz, I suppose you'd call it. But that's the only thing I've done. Never done anything of my own. So I thought, I want to record an album, because this is going to make me famous and all that. But with wonderful naivety, I just thought, well, I'll just record stuff and it'd be great, So, I've still got the album. I recorded this album. I wrote it on the Porter studio part of it, and I went to a studio with some really good musicians to do the first half, and we did, especially it's like a jazz quintet, really. I've got this fantastic drummer called Liam Ganocki, who works with Steel Eye Span now, but played on the Jerry Rafferty albums. Hired him, and a bass player, double bass player. He made Phil Bond plays piano. He one of his tunes we recorded as well, and a wonderful sax player and flute player called Duncan Lamont Jr., who had been in the show with me. And so the first side was like jazz, all originals. The second side, though, was just me and my mates. They got a home studio, which of course in those days was a huge fucking great thing. And the reverb was this great big long, like drain pipe thing with a spring running all the way down it, called the Great British Spring, you know. And it, you know, but because I had no idea what I was doing, I was just like throwing paint at a canvas, and because I'd come out of the punk era, I suppose, I was quite happy with mad drum machines going, you know, and I'm playing my guitar and bass, doing whatever, you know, with no filter really, with nobody saying, this is utter shit, Pete, look, try and do a better job of this, you know. And so I did this album, and it's like, it's worth listening to in a way, just to laugh, because the fact that I could sell this thing, you know, I'd go out and play nice, easy listening money. Money, I said, music, and they'll get this cassette, you know, and as I say, it was just hysterical, really. I mean, it's one. I mean, I can only sort of give myself some credit to the fact that the ideas in it are okay. It's just the execution of them, really. I mean, the jazz size actually is all right. I mean, that is, but again, it's not what people are expecting. And I had no idea. The punter there, buying a product from me, had an idea. You know, they're buying a bar of chocolate. They're not expecting a packet of tobacco. And effectively, I haven't got this. I thought, well, this is my music. They'll buy it. Great.
So how much did it cost to actually create? So you create the album as a tape. You recorded the tape.
It cost me about £1,000 to record the music and get the cover. Didn't cost a lot.
And you were selling them for what?
I was selling them for £4 each.
Right.
And I mean, the first weekend I sold 50.
Oh.
And that's when the penny dropped. I thought, oh, I suddenly got £200 for this weekend that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And of course, by the 6 months later, I'd sold sort of 2,000 of them. Wow. And my mate Chris King, who'd got his little studio, he did cassette duplication. Nearly all of his work now was duplicating my cassettes. And so that was an interesting old time, that change. Then I got together with a singer and thought,
and this is all still in Birmingham?
Yeah. And we sort of got together as a couple as well, and thought, right. And you know, that Midas touch thing, you know, I felt like everything I was going to touch would turn into gold, because it seemed like that I'd just thrown an album together and suddenly I'm making all this money, you know. And so we thought, right, okay, let's do this properly and let's make a real album that we can get a record contract with and everything. So having had this good income coming in, I went to the bank manager and said, will you lend me £5,000 to make an album? And you'd think, well, Busker goes to the bank manager, give me £5,000, make an album. Most bank managers would say, oh, fuck off. But because there's so much money going through, it made sense. And so me and my ex of a long time ago wrote this album, and we hired a really good studio and a producer, and hired some of the same musicians, but a great bass player and a couple of others. And this is going to be really good. I've got the money to make a proper vinyl album and have a proper cover done, and this is going to rocket the career. This is going to, you know, make me into this sort of well, perhaps that's not a pop star, but a serious musician and all that, you know. As soon as the project started, as soon as that moment we arrived at the studio, everything went wrong. You know, it's like just watching this whole thing, instead of turning into gold, turning into shit. You know, something. My then girlfriend had just got pregnant unexpectedly, and she's got a cold, and she's got to do all the singing. You know? So morning sickness and a cold, and we've got the studio booked for this time. You know, it's costing a fortune. The drummer was great; he was never a problem. The bass player was very professional. My keyboard player mate was just like this. You know, he was volatile, and his wife had just broken her leg, and he arrived in this state and was getting more and more wound up. The producer I'd hired didn't get on with the engineer, and they were at loggerheads the whole time. And it just started, the whole thing started to go wrong, you know. And famously, there's this one sort of jazzy tune we did. It's probably, again, in retrospect, it's pretty crap, to be honest. But the piano player played this solo on it that was really out there. And I needed to be right in there rather than out there, because this is a commercial project. And so, but I said, look, can you do that solo again, Phil? He said, like, you see him go red in the face, says, you know, like, I'm not playing like Oscar Peterson's, and, you know, that's how I feel it, man. So, you know, and in the meantime, all this money I've borrowed is going down the toilet, you know? And that was a learning experience, because we did get an album done in the end, but it wasn't very good, and it had cost me all this borrowed money, and now I'm in debt, you know. And suddenly, you know that feeling when you get to the end of the year. We recorded it in about November, and you get past December, you get past Christmas, soon you're into January, and suddenly all your money just goes like that. So the income's dried up. Instead of having just regular busking money coming in, it's half of that, and suddenly everything's out of control because of the baby on the way. And of course, I think I was full of, I'd sort of suddenly lost all my confidence, I think, really, because everything had rolled along fantastically, and suddenly it's all gone over the cliff, you know. So that was, and so I sort of almost in, how do you put it, sort of, as a form of revenge, I recorded another album for 120 quid. You know, that I just didn't care about, just threw all the most commercial tracks possible, all the Misties and the way we were, me playing everything, even playing cymbals on top of the drum machine. And my bass playing was truly awful. But I recorded that, and that sort of saved the day, because the punters liked it. So yeah, so that was a real interesting experience.
What advice would you give to new buskers now? And what are the kind of practical things that people might not think about, things like, you know, self-employment and unions and things like that?
Yeah, okay. Well, if you're in the UK, join the Musicians Union, first thing. That's what you should do. It gives you public liability cover. It insures your gear up to 2,000 quid. Gives you legal help, and so on and so forth, and lots of advice and lots of other things. In fact, it even gives you protection for a tax investigation as well. So that's first thing, join that. If you're not in the UK, then there's other musicians, other unions in other countries. I was on the executive committee of the Musicians Union up until the start of this year. I did 8 years. And so, you know, we were a member of FIM, which is the International Federation of Musicians Unions. And so, I mean, I was in Copenhagen a year ago for the conference there, where we've got musicians unions from all around the world, you know, which is a fascinating learning thing. So join the union, and remember to pay the subs, because that's the thing. You don't pay your subs, then suddenly you don't get the benefits, and if you're in trouble, you can't say, please, will you help me? Well, you don't pay your subs, you know. So that's important. Keep a record of your earnings and your expenses. The easy way of doing that is pay your money into a bank. You get your money, pay it in the bank. Then you look at the statements, you know how much you've earned. That's a simple way. For starting off, obviously as time goes by and you're invoicing people for gigs you do, then that's a different matter. But at least to start off with that. But keep every receipt. You know, if you're, you know, you get on a train, get a bus ticket, or if you're driving car park ticket, you know, petrol, keep them all, put them in your back pocket and in your wallet, and then put them into an envelope and keep them together. So that when, you know, that's the start. And then you should do your, I can't remember the actual, I mean, it's been 40 years since I went self-employed, but I mean, there's a pretty simple way of going about it. I mean, of course, you've got websites now and all that. Go self-employed. I mean, if you're really earning next to nothing and it's just a hobby and you're a student, to some extent, and I hate to say this because you could get yourself into trouble, but if it's really, really low, then it's not really going to matter. But there's going to be that horrible point when suddenly you're earning a bit more and you're thinking, oh, well, I'm all right. But then if the shit hits the fan, it can hit the fan. And so it's just, and of course, the irony of it now is that, like, because I've kept, you know, I've been self-employed for all this time, with this COVID thing, and we're all, as a self-employed person, I've had good money from the government to help me through COVID, because the Chancellor was giving 80% of the average of your last 3 years' accounts for this period. For some buskers, they haven't given any accounts, they've lived outside it, so they're going to get nothing. There's other buskers who will have not been entirely honest and have declared a lot less than they actually have. And again, they've really lost out now. So, it's really, being honest is a lot less hassle, because you don't have to worry about a lot of things. But even if you're being honest, you have to prove you're being honest, which means you keep your records. And simply, and also I'd recommend that paying for things, as much as possible, use a card. So you pay your money into the bank, you pay a card to pay for things. You withdraw money from the bank for cash that you spend. That way it's kept all very simple and clean and easy. I got into a right mess back in 1981 because, like most people, I've staggered into self-employment. I signed off the dole. I got me little gig doing the theatre thing for 6 weeks. After that finished, I was doing a few little gigs around town and going busking and not earning a lot. I never actually occurred to me about tax at all, or accountants or anything. And it's only when I got the gig with the paraphernalia then I had to do it. But I hadn't earned hardly anything. I got recommended this very dodgy accountant, and the tax man suddenly sent me a bill for 2,000 or 2,250 quid, which again in 1981 was a huge amount of money, particularly for somebody who's just starting. It's just unrealistic. He'd seen me on telly with this band and thought, oh, okay, he must be earning a fortune. The dodgy accountant I'd unfortunately used hadn't put any of my expenses through that I'd kept. Anyway, I had to get another accountant to sort it out, and it was all right in the end. But there's that lack of, because I had to try and work backwards to solve the problem, whereas had I kept all the receipts from the beginning, it would all have been obvious how I'd got there and what I'd earned, and it would have saved a lot of nightmare, and heartache and the rest of it. So that's really, those two things. Being a busker, the actual process of going out busking, the general advice there is they say don't be a bell end, So in terms of other buskers, you try and show, respect as best you can, and but at the same time try not to get pushed over. You do have to be a bit careful. There are nutcases out there. About 2 years ago, I had a situation, first time, almost, I would say, forever. I had a guy come up. I got Connor, my son, with me, who's 18 then, and he's playing guitar and I'm playing fiddle, and I'm showing him the ropes. And in Birmingham, there's a nasty sort of dossy sort of junkie character comes up and sort of grabs a fiver out just in front of Connor, So normally I'd have my hands full of violin and everything, because Connor says, grab this. I grab him, and thinking he'll drop the money. Instead he turns on me. So I end up fisticuffs in the middle of Birmingham, which is not very good, because for lots of reasons. What's interesting as well is that now that I'm this age, everybody sympathises with me. They say, "Oh, you're all right," and I've got it on camera. We can take it to the police and everything. But it looks dreadful, and in that situation, you have to defend yourself. It's going to be me getting hit, and but it's also really bad for your tendons in your hands to get involved. Actually, the hand that was holding him actually hurt much more. I had to go to the doctors about that, because it really was hurting, just that grip to try and of course, in reality, if you had time to think about it, it's only a fiver, what the hell? It's not worth all that hassle. But that's the difficulty. A situation like that, arises once in a blue moon, and you have to deal with that very generally. Please, the things don't happen like that to me normally. Obviously there's a few nutters out there, But yeah, so again, you know, there's a lady asked me to give a violin lesson to her granddaughter, and this girl was about 9, really sort of precocious, got great talent, really great, and she could really play the fiddle. I said, oh yeah, she goes out busking every Saturday, you know, and she earns a fortune, you know. 9. I said, I hope you're with there. She's all right, don't worry, you know. Look, I wouldn't dream of letting a 9-year-old out onto the street, you know. I mean, let's say I've just had to sort of have fisticuffs with a guy in Birmingham, and I'm a big bloke, you know. So
yeah,
so,
I mean, it's actually, I think it's like 14's the age limit. I think for busking anyway, you can't be unaccompanied. I don't think you're supposed to be under 14.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what but for whatever it is, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, it's not a matter of what's legal. It's a matter of just the safety of the child. You know, I think you get these. 9. It's almost like they're lovely people, but almost very naive, sort of middle class, sort of. You know, and they've done a great job of bringing the creativeness out of this little girl. I mean, she could be turned into a great musician later on, but I mean, Jesus, I just wouldn't dream of. You know, if you want you want a bounce on either side, sort of thing. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, at least one parent there. So you've talked a bit about, you know, sort of COVID stuff, and you've kind of, because you've kind of set things up properly for yourself, you know, in terms of tax and everything, that you've benefited from the scheme.
Yeah.
So what's the actual scene like now? The busking scene is after, you know, COVID, when obviously a lot of venues are shut. A lot of venues, you know, they're going to get hopefully going to get a big grant to keep some of them open, but some of the venues might never open again. And
a lot of the small places.
And the whole scene's changed. The wedding scene's changed. The wedding market's changed, I mean, which is a big market for musicians. Yeah.
This is my contract folder for the weddings. Well, actually for any gig, but it's particularly, I think it's all weddings in there. It's been a nightmare, you know. I mean, yesterday, I have a lady who does admin a couple of hours a week for me on a Monday morning. So yesterday morning, it wasn't a couple of hours, it's 3 hours. And 2 of those hours was just going through the contracts, trying to work out who's moved what wedding to what date and who hasn't done it, who's still hanging out for this. What about this one that's actually been cancelled? Or are we holding out to see if it will be reinstated? Do I need to refund the deposit on that? It's all so, yeah. But in terms, I mean, these days my gigs tend to be either weddings or the bread and butter gigs have been restaurants for the last few years.
Pardon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hadn't thought that. Yeah, but yeah. So, but that had been more difficult. I mean, you know. Britain has a great way of shooting itself in the foot, you know, like the Brexit thing, you know, just when we don't need to worry about instability, you know, and then followed on by COVID just to finish it off. But that whole thing of uncertainty really affects people's spending. And so you watch the restaurants struggle more and more as the Brexit thing loomed. And also the weddings as well, you know, because I mean, let's face it, what musicians do is a luxury. You know, you can get married without a violinist. I mean, I think it's very unwise, but I think everybody should have it. And the same, you can have a restaurant without a violinist. You can have funerals without violinists. You can have. I must tell you about my classic moment doing the funeral.
Please.
Yeah, I've done quite a lot of funerals, but this particular one was different. And it was in 1989, and it's also a story of technology. Do you remember DAT tapes? Yeah, for those who don't know, we had cassettes, which were all wow and fluttery and things. Then we had CDs come along, but of course you can't record on CDs. Then they had this thing called a DAT tape, which is a small video tape that was actually digital quality sound. It's got the same quality or better quality than a CD, and it's on a tape. And the beauty of it is you could skip one track to another because it got digital code on it. So anyway, I'd just moved on to using these, and I was booked to play this funeral, but it turned out it was actually a pre-funeral. It was actually playing for an open coffin. before the service. So basically, they're all there. I had to just play nice music while people come in and paid their last respects to the body, sort of thing, and all that. But with one instruction was that when everybody came in and they would shut the lid to the coffin and screw it there, at that point could I play Danny Boy? So it's going very well at this point. So anyway, they all come in, the undertakers, the big screwdrivers, and everybody's in there. I press the skip button on that tape and get ready, and out comes Killing Me Softly. It was too late to change. I just had to play it as if it was intended. People started singing along and everything. So that was one of those moments.
It's a great story. I can imagine that. That's kind of like something you'd see in a sitcom or something. Only Fools and Horses, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's like strange at the time it was happening. I didn't even twig the significance. I just thought, oh no, it's the wrong track.
It's just the wrong track. Yeah.
Play. Look professional. It's only I was doing a jazz gig on the night, and so I thought, oh God, you're Killing Me Softly, as I put the lid down on the topic. But there we go. I still got paid. So,
that's the main thing. That's it, isn't it? You've got to show up and do your bit and go home with the money.
Cool.
Pete, well, it's been great chatting to you.
To sleep.
No, not at all. It's been great to hear your story, and I know that obviously from what I heard, there's lots more to say.
Yeah, we've only got up to 86.
We'll have to get you back. We'll get you back on, and we'll have the post CD years. CDs came out in 86.
Well, yeah. I mean, I did my first CD I had done was in 1990, and also had a record contract at that point and stuff. And also, for all those who want to have a laugh, have you seen my New Faces video?
That's what I was going to ask you about. Yeah, I have seen it. Yeah. So I think go on. You can tell the New Faces story how you got on.
Yeah. Well, that's basically I just auditioned again. Part of this thing, trying to better your career. I auditioned for the ITV, Central Television it was then, show New Faces, which is like, Britain's Got Talent of its day. And so I got on there and actually won on the night when I was on. Although the ventriloquist Jimmy Tanlin actually won on the postal vote, because he used to have a postal vote then. But it's worth watching because it's just funny. I mean, musically it's quite good. I mean, terrifying gig. I mean, to have to walk out, in front of 1,500 people as you're the solo artist, but also with a full camera crew and everything and lights and text. But the worst bit is you're walking out in front of 40 musicians, like it's a 40-piece orchestra that's going to back you. And they're all looking at you thinking, what the fuck's this? That was funny. There's also, I should give you some links, there's also some YouTube of me with paraphernalia back in 1981, which is funny. My then girlfriend chose some clothes for me because they'd said you need to have some clothes that stand out more on stage. So she got me these purple dungarees and a purple stripy t-shirt. Looked ridiculous, but then again, it was the 80s. So yeah, cool. Right, okay. Well, there we go. So hopefully, I've cured all the insomnia for the watchers, and there we go. Cool.
No, it's great to hear from you, Pete. And like I say, you've been certainly from like the busking point of view, and you've always been encouraged by seeing you out there, and just impressed with your the length of you've been playing for all that time, and keep
still haven't found a proper job. It's a thing.
Yeah, that's the aim of the game, isn't it? See how long you can avoid getting a proper job.
Yeah, sort of. I say, it's better than working for a living.
It is.
Cool.
Well, Pete, nice one, and it'd be great to so hopefully people watching this who are wanting to get started, the sort of there are musicians who are keen to get out there and try busking for the first time. Hopefully they'll pick up some tips from that and from what you've said, and check you out as well. Check out your socials.
albums available on the website and all that stuff, and PayPal's available. Support your starving artist. You can tell I'm starving. Look at me, I'm just wasting away. It's terrible. That's the worst bit. Is looking at the old photos when I was really skinny and good looking, and big hair, and ponytail at the back, and that variations going up and everything, So
yeah, you look like a rock star. You have the rock star look. You could have been the rock star. No?
Yeah. So something went wrong somewhere, but there we go. It's good fun. Cool. Anyway, great. Well,
take care, mate.
Right.
See ya.